and welcome to the shop. This is the third part of a three-part series comparing the Bigme Inknote Color Plus versus the Boox Tab Ultra C. Neither of those titles roll off the tongue, but nevertheless, we're forging ahead anyway. In the previous two episodes, we saw the Inknote Plus take an early lead, but then we saw the Boox device take a solid advantage as it comes to reading types of activities. So this episode will feature the last of the review elements that I've done. We'll see if the Boox can hold on to its lead or if Bigme can come from behind to take the win. And then we'll finally wrap everything up. It's been quite a journey. I hope you enjoyed this last episode. Let's get into it. As a reminder, this is where we left off last week. It was a clean sweep for the Ultra C, but it was close, a lot closer than the grid suggests. Okay, now we're going to focus on the native note-taking apps on each device. And I want to emphasize that we're going to focus here on the functionality of the two apps. We'll deal with the actual writing experience on each app in a different segment. This is just looking at what's available on the two apps. And there's a clear advantage to one device on this. It's really not particularly close. And you can actually see that on the screen just at a glance. What you're looking at is one of the available templates on each device. And the one on the left, the Inknote Plus, expresses a problem which repeats itself in virtually every native app that's included, which is this weird chain darkening of some lines and other lines being lighter. It really makes the template look frankly unprofessional. I mean, I think this is one of the weakest points of the Inknote Plus are these default templates, and it's a real shame. The device itself does so well, but these templates are an absolute joke. I mean, now the good news, fortunately, is that you can download templates that work just fine as PDFs. You can load them in. It's quite easy. And if I click on the toolbar here and we'll go into the template icon, I've loaded a couple templates myself, and I think this is it. Okay, much nicer. So it's the good news is that this inherent flaw with the Inknote is easily fixed. You can create your own PDF templates, or you can download ones for free on the web. So it's a fixable problem, but it's a problem you shouldn't have to deal with to begin with, and you don't deal with this problem with the Ultra C, which has a much larger selection of templates to choose from, and they all look like they're supposed to look, and just as the one on the screen. The Inknote Plus has a nice, simple interface, which I actually like. It's just this bar on top. As we saw earlier, I can click on the toolbar to bring on additional functions. Of course, with Boox, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how the menus are laid out, so you can minimize this, and then you can also even move that over to the side. So there's a more functionality with that on the Boox. I'm just going to go down at a glance and talk about all the things that the Boox app can do that the Inknote can't, and it's quite a list. So layers is number one. Both have the ability, as we saw, to do templates, of course, and you can then draw on top of that, but the Boox has different layers. So if you want to have multiple layers, say you're doing some sketching, you can do that with the Boox. There are no layers with the Inknote Plus. The Boox offers a different canvas size. So the Inknote only has the one page. I actually don't personally use multiple pages. I like having the page fit on the screen, but that's not the point here. The point is you could do more with the Ultra C. Both have lasso functionality, and it's called crop over here, but the lasso functionality is way better and more complicated than it is on the Inknote. We'll go ahead and hold on. I guess I have to have something in there, so we'll just type in hi, do the lasso. Okay, so now once we have something lassoed, we can tag it. We can create a link to it. We can change the colors based on the selection. You can cut, copy, and paste in the Inknote, but there's just more that you can do here, and there's even a more button. So yeah, you can do a couple cool things like flip it around for some reason. I'm not sure why you want to do that, but you can. You don't have that over here. Crop only allows you to do basic moving and then copying and pasting. Let's see, what else? Those are the major differences. There's a few other minor differences between the apps, but the point being is the Ultra C can do more than the Inknote Plus. Now, I'll talk a little bit later at the end why I actually like to use the Inknote Plus anyway, but in full transparency, I mean, there's no question. If you're looking at the feature set available in the Ultra C and you're comparing it to the Inknote Plus, this isn't an advantage to the Ultra C. This is a strong advantage to the Ultra C. It just isn't close. It's one of the few areas where there's just no competition. There's no hesitation. The Ultra C does a better job. Now, is the Inknote note-taking a competent note-taking? Yes, it is. It's just that it has much less functionality. Another, that reminds me, another thing I didn't talk about, a very important feature is the search functionality within the Boox. And where is that? There it is. The search functionality here is amazing. It can look for tags. It can look for handwriting and do searching on that. There is no search functionality for the Inknote Plus. So again, much more going on here than there is over here. But as a basic note taker, the Inknote Plus is fine. It's very competent. The writing is great. The colors look good on both because, again, same screen. So no differences there. Now, the one advantage, and this means a lot to me, but in the grand scheme of things, isn't necessarily important to most folks, but that's the highlighter. So as good as the Boox note-taking is over the Inknote, there is one area where the Inknote completely destroys Boox. And that's the highlighter. So if I've clicked on the highlighter there, I'm going to go ahead and draw it. That is a nice looking highlighter. Let's see what Boox can do. Yuck. This is like a cloudy mess, and this is a perfect, pristine highlighter. I love not only the coloring of it, but I love the drawing of it. You'll notice that in Boox, you're literally drawing much like you draw with a pen, which is fine. You may prefer that. I like how Inknote takes care of this. You draw this line, it fills it in, and I can actually draw a block by going like that. The highlighter is the okay, I'm going to say it. It's the highlight of the note-taking device. I apologize for that. But it is really amazing, and I really enjoy this, and I can't emphasize that enough. But objectively, there's no question that the Ultra C has a way more functional app with a lot more features. And if any of those features matter to you, then this is no contest whatsoever. So that's my assessment of the inherent note-taking apps on each device. The Ultra C takes this category by force, the largest victory on any category thus far. So the next thing that I want to cover is the writing experience. So we talked earlier about the differences between the note-taking apps, and clearly Boox had the more sophisticated app, but both were competent. So this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what is it like to sit and actually write with the styluses on the respective devices. So I've got a short video. It's not the greatest video, but we'll see a couple things in action, as I write out on each screen. And we've also put the microphone close to the devices so you get a sense of what the sound is like. Now, one caveat to all this, because it is at an awkward angle, I'm not doing the best writing, so you'll have to excuse me for that. However, in full disclosure, my handwriting is not that great to begin with, so it's not that far off from how I normally write, but it was an unusual angle to write at. Okay, putting that little bit aside, there's two things that I hope will come out in this brief segment, which is, number one, if you look closely, you'll notice that the Boox stylus, the tip of the stylus and then the ink are much closer together. There doesn't feel like there's any type of gap between those two things. So it's very nicely calibrated. So watch out for that. The Inknote has a little bit of a gap. So Boox, I think, does a little bit of a better job in that regard, but both are perfectly fine. The other thing I want you to listen for is the sound. Listen to the scratchiness of each device. Now, the one thing I will say is I had the microphone placed really close to the surface of the screen. And so in reality, you can hear the sounds on both devices, but as you actually use these devices where you're a little further away from them, you hear the Inknote device much more distinctly, and the Boox device becomes a bit more subtle. Nevertheless, the actual sounds are captured by the microphone. So let's take a look at this clip, and then we'll come back and I'll give you some thoughts about the writing experience overall. All right, we'll see if this works. I'm going to do a quick demo. I've got the microphone right here, and let's see if we can listen to what it's like to write. Okay, let's see if that picked that up. Let's do a comparison now with the Inknote Plus. Get that in the frame. And we'll go ahead and use the Bluetooth button to get rid of that. Okay. Refresh. Okay, and there's an example, hopefully, of how each screen sounds and a little bit of what it's like to write on each one. Okay, so that wasn't, maybe the best video of the writing experience, but I think there's enough there to get a sense of it. What I will say from my own personal experience is I really prefer writing on the Inknote. And I have to be honest, I find it a little difficult to explain why. There are certain features I know that stand out. We've mentioned one earlier with the stylus. The thickness of the Inknote stylus makes it a little more comfortable to grip. I think the sound of the scratchiness of the Inknote device I find to be much more pleasant. Although I don't mind the sound off the Boox device either. I think it has its own unique sound, which I like. I just happen to like the Inknote more. But there's something else beyond that. There's just something about writing on the Inknote device that's a little more comfortable, and there's something a little more distant about writing on the Boox device. And I know how strange and ethereal that sounds, especially after I highlighted how nice the connection was between the pen tip stylus from the Boox note and then the ink that flows from it. It's better in that one regard, there's no question about it, but the overall experience on the Inknote is better. And I wish I could explain better than I've been able to explain in this video of why, but That's about the best I can do. I can just tell you that in practice, I've enjoyed writing on the Inknote more. Now, it's not a vastly superior experience. I don't want to overstate this. Both are very competent note-taking devices, and it's not as if the Inknote blows the books out of the water. Far from it. I think it's a very slight edge, but it is an edge, and ultimately I award the point to the Inknote. It's been a while, but the Inknote Plus finally notches another victory. Can they add a few more to make this a respectable competition? So next up, let's talk about the battery of these devices. And I want to focus on two aspects. One is how well do these devices handle standby time, and then how well do these devices handle just normal usage. The reason why I focus on standby time is I like having my devices so that when I need them, I just open them up and I can pretty much get in and get going. And that's what standby mode allows those devices to do. But if you have too much of a drain on standby mode, then that doesn't become practical. And I've had devices where it has a standby mode, but it's going to drain within a week. There's just no point in doing that. It really needs longevity in order to have an appropriate amount of functionality. So I took a couple opportunities to measure the standby battery drain on both devices on two separate occasions. I waited a day to 2 days to measure the results, and I have a pretty clear idea of how these devices differ for that type of battery drain, and it's not close. So the Boox device generally has about, it drains very little, and I actually estimated, and these are very back of the envelope estimates, but I estimated it could run 100 days on standby mode. Now that may be a little bit of an exaggeration. Maybe it's 75 days, maybe it's more, I don't know, but it can last a very long time. It can last more than 2 months on standby mode. I feel pretty confident in saying that. The Bigme device was not as good. It's clearly inferior to the Boox device in this regard. Over the same time periods, the same conditions, I found that my estimate for Bigme was that it would last probably anywhere between 25 days to a little over a month, depending on when I took the estimate. So actually both devices have very much acceptable standby time, but the gap between them is enormous. And this is one of those few categories that I'm not only giving an advantage, but I'm going to give a strong advantage to the Boox Tab C because it clearly has the better standby battery. It's not as obvious of a gap as it relates to performance. And to be fair here, it's really difficult. There's all sorts of circumstances that you could put a battery under and all sorts of tests that you can go through to measure this. And I didn't do any of that. But what I did do is, as I was filming a lot of these videos and demonstrating the tablets themselves, I watched to see what the battery drain was during that process. And again, the Boox did outperform the Bigme. It just wasn't as huge of a gap. So in my trial, and this was just one sample, but the Inknote drained about 7% through all the videos that I filmed, where the Ultra C drained about 5%. So clearly the Ultra C was better, but not by a huge margin. So for usage battery, I'm going to go ahead and give the advantage to the Tab C. Of course, the caveat is that I have not done extensive testing. I don't plan to do extensive testing on the battery. I just don't have that type of bandwidth. But I feel pretty comfortable that barring some unusual circumstances, you're going to get better battery life out of the Boox device than you're going to get out of the Bigme device. But I do think that the usage is a small gap, but the standby time is an enormous one. And so that's how I'll be awarding those two categories. The Ultra C notches yet another strong victory, and a minor one as well. The Inknote tried to make a comeback, but it wasn't meant to be. Okay, well, let's talk cases now. Now, if you order the device, either the Bigme or the Boox device, directly from the company, then both devices come with a case. The Boox device comes with its normal trifold case, not the keyboard case. And then the Inknote comes with its one magnetic case. Both cases, I believe, are magnetic, where you just have to snap the device onto the case and you're good to go. We're not going to talk about the keyboard case here. I actually did purchase the keyboard case, and so I'll do a future review about that. But that's a separate thing in my mind when trying to compare these two devices. That's a functionality that the Boox has that the Inknote does not. So I'm going to put those as separate and just compare the Inknote Plus case to my thoughts on the trifold Boox case, because I don't have that case, but I do have some experience with book cases, so I'll play on that a bit. And plus I've read reviews as well, but let's start with the Bigme. So here is the case. It's a nice looking case. It's very thin, which is great. It is a magnetic case, as I just talked about. So let's go ahead and put the device in there. We can just slide it in and oops. And it just snaps right into place. Nice grip. It's not going to go anywhere. And then you can fold it over and flap it like that. Really nice sound. And you can also see how that protects the stylus from falling out. See, so that stylus isn't going anywhere with this case on it. So a very nice case. It has a nice look to it. I'm not sure if that's going to get picked up or not by the camera. Yeah, we'll get a little bit of light shading on there. I like this case a lot. The Boox case, I can't comment on how it looks. Obviously, I don't have it. I've owned a number of Boox devices in my time, and I've had covers for those devices, and those covers have generally not been that great. They haven't aged particularly well. They're not always made of the best materials. I don't know if that's the case with this particular case or not. But what I do know for a fact is that the case is a trifold case, and that drives me nuts. Now, if you like to prop up your device, then for you, you might not be so concerned about that. But I actually never prop up my device. So having a case like here with the Bigme is, I just like the idea that I can just fold it over and I'm good. You try to fold over a trifold case like that, and it's much more of an awkward and unnecessary experience in my mind. So for that reason, I'm actually going to give the edge of the cases to the Inknote Plus, with, of course, the caveat that I have not actually been hands-on with the Boox case. So you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. However, I have read other folks talk about the Boox case, and I haven't heard a lot of flattering things about that. Again, I'll remind everybody that I'm not talking about the keyboard case. That's something I'll talk about in a separate video. I will say, in a last note, that both the Inknote and the Boox cases have auto on and off functionality, where when you open the case, it turns the tablet on, and you close it, it puts it into standby mode. So both have that same functionality. But in terms of the quality of the case, I'm thinking it's a pretty safe bet that Bigme wins this round. The Inknote takes the last competition, but the Ultra C wins solidly overall. Yet I can't help but reflect that this was closer than this grid suggests. Well, that concludes our three-part series. That was a lot of fun to put together. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if this came through, but in my opinion, these two devices both come out pretty well in this analysis. I think the Boox device is fantastic overall. It got the better ratings overall, and probably justifies its $100 premium over the Inknote Lite, which we didn't review here, but we used Inknote Plus as a proxy. I think the Inknote Plus came out great. It loses out in many categories to the Boox device, but in a very small margin. It holds its own, has a lot of value, and I think has its own strengths that are worth considering. Personally, my plan is to continue to use the Inknote device as my writing device. I use my Inknote, or my use case rather, is just to sit on the corner of my desk. I open it up, I create to-do lists, I write out notes for videos. So I do pretty simple note taking. So the advantages of the Boox app really aren't that relevant for me because I'm just treating it like a pad of paper really. And I love, as I'm sure you know, the highlighting function of the Inknote Plus. So I just appreciate the writing experience better. The Boox, I think, has a better reading experience. I think that even didn't blow the Inknote out of the water, but it did consistently do better on reading apps. And for me, especially that lack of ghosting that's much more prevalent in the Inknote, I think the Boox will be a great reading device, particularly for magazines and Google News and those types of sources. So I plan on continuing to use both devices in the future. They're both great devices, and I can speak highly of both of them, and hopefully that came through this video series. Well, that's it. We've come to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, please share them. If there are things that I should have covered that I didn't, I'm happy to consider those and perhaps do an addendum in future videos. As always, please subscribe and like if you happen to have liked the videos, of course. I'd appreciate it. And until then, I will see you next time. Thank you.